I am. This is a test run for a biblical Greek reading group. We're going to be taking a look at Psalm 22. I want to see how this is going. I've got my wife's MacBook over here, and to see if this is going out to test. And so far, it looks like it's picking something up. There always is a delay. There's a few seconds delay from when I speak and when the actual thing. I do want to, let me do a test here. I want to check something. Okay, that was just, I just wanted to do a sound test there, but I hope you can hear me. I thought I would do a look at seeing how whether or not this would be something that nerdy language majors or anybody else would be interested in, having a live stream look at a Greek reading passage. I chose Psalm 23. But Psalm 23 in the Septuagint is actually Psalm 22 in the Septuagint. And so we're going to be looking at Psalm 22 LXX, the Septuagint version. And so we're going to bring up, now I've got two ways to share this. This particular way, this is my BibleWorks program. And it will, you can see here at the top, I have a New American Standard Version. Here I have the Masoretic text here. Also have a transliteration of the Hebrew. And then here is our Septuagint version. And right now it's showing it per verse. However, we can see the whole psalm here. Here I've highlighted it. So this is initially what I want us to take a look at. Now, one of the things about dealing with a biblical passage is that we're dealing with a psalm which would have been primarily communicated to a audience orally. Very few people would have actually had a text in front of them. And so we, being 21st century readers, are dealing with a literary culture in which we read a text. And because of that, we've been given in these several years, we've been given our Bibles, and our Bibles have chosen in their translations to format the text in particular ways. For instance, here, as I'm turning to our Psalm 23 in the New American Standard Version, I don't know if the lighting will come up, but you can see, of course, this is formatted in such a way where the stanzas and the lines of it are formatted according to certain lines. And that particular, that in and of itself adds an interpretation quality to it. Whereas a manuscript, and I have not examined the manuscript of Psalm 22 in the Septuagint, but I don't know whether or not they would have formatted it. But here in my BibleWorks program that I'm using here, the late, great BibleWorks, you can see here that it is, of course, added the verse numbers, and those would not have been original to it. But here, it is not formatted according to the poetic theory of scholars. Now, the structuring of it in these verses of being presented as in stanzas and lines, in some ways adds a slight interpretive nuance to it. And thus we need to be aware of that. Now, so what I've done here is our BibleWorks text here. And so I want you to know I am not a Septuagint scholar. I've had several years of Greek, but I have not by any means say that I am an absolute expert. And so as I speak to you, as I go through this, we're going to realize that we're going to realize that any insights I give you, somewhat, I am kind of cheating a bit by using Bible words because I do have some parsing information. So I don't want you to think more of me than you might. Also, I do have in front of me, and let me just show you this. Wait a second, here we go. I do have my reader's edition of the Septuagint. And so that is a great help. If you do not have it, I would recommend you save your money. If you have any sort of rich uncles or aunts or parents that would help invest in this. But it is a great resource. I don't know whether or not the streaming will allow this to come through very clearly, but here we've got Psalm 22 here. So I'm using that also as an assistance in our reading. So that's what we'll do. Now, I also formatted this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing the BibleWorks program momentarily, and I went ahead and formatted this in my word processing program, and I want to share that with you. Here, I formatted it in according to my understanding of the text and the lines that you could use in Hebrew poetry. A lot of parallelism is used in which statements are made, and then there is a parallel statement that either sometimes it restates it, sometimes it contrasts it, and sometimes it just enhances the statement that was made. And so here, for instance, kurios poimane me kai uden me husterese. Oh, just a brief note. I do not consider myself an expert in pronunciation. I absorbed the method that was taught me in seminary, and I certainly yield to someone who is a better expert on reading pronunciation of Greek. And so while that, of course, is a debate, I think that would get us too far off. But this is the pronunciation I was taught. But here I went ahead and formatted this according to the lines as I understand it. But I thought I would show that to you. And now let me get back to the BibleWorks that we can, or actually, let me just go ahead and leave this up here. And I'm going to pull up my BibleWorks to kind of assist me as I go through it. But here we have Salmos to David, a psalm to David. I do want to point out a couple of things. Here we have how do we want to understand this psalm? How do we want to understand especially this toe here? Our article, it is, of course, translating here the lamed that we have in the Hebrew, le David, and trying to understand how that works in how we should interpret that. In fact, let me go ahead and stop. Let me share the BibleWorks screen again so that you can see what I'm talking about. This to David would be an interpretation of how do we understand, is this saying by David, which is a very traditional way of understanding it. But you notice here in this NETS translation, the New English Translation of the Septuagint, here it has translated that article pertaining to David, associated with David. There are some theorists with regards to Psalms when it talks about the Le David, that it could indicate not necessarily that it's by David, but it could be a psalm that was written, composed in dedication to David, in reflection upon their knowledge of his life, and they composed a psalm in dedication. So to David, or possibly understood as for David. Or some, I've even heard some scholars suggest that it could even be a matter of in the style of David. And so how we translate that is going to be an interesting thing. But here we have Salmos to David, Kurios Poemine me kai uden me hysterese. A psalm by David, to David, for David possibly. The Lord. Now, just a brief note here. Kurios, Lord. Now, the Septuagint was translated 3rd, 2nd century BC from Hebrew into Greek. And by that time, in post-exilic Judaism, you had the development of the idea among the Jews that you did not pronounce the tetragrammaton, the divine name here that we have. And so the tradition rose up that when you read the scriptures, that you would, instead of pronouncing the divine name, you would use the pronunciation of Adonai. And so here we have this transliteration here that you can see that I'm highlighting. So as they read, they would have Mizmor la David, and rather than saying the tetragrammaton, they would have said Adonai, Roi lo Echsar. So this Adonai in the translation from the Hebrew into Greek, they went ahead and picked up the translation, the idea of this Adonai, rather than trying to transliterate the tetragrammaton here, the Yod He Wah He. They instead adopted that traditional practice here. And so one of the things that I remind my congregation because you can see here in the New American Standard Version, the Lord, and it's in all caps, I remind them that in the time of David, in the time that this psalm would have been composed, this being a very distinct, unique name for God, they need to understand there's a contrast in the culture. There's a contrast in understanding that the culture around them named the divine being, the deity, with other names. And the understanding need to be for the Israelites is that their God is not the God with other names like Molech or Baal or the Asherah or anything like that. It is specifically their God is this God. It is, according to the way that some have speculated, Yahweh. And so I try to remind my congregation when I preach that it is indeed Lord in all caps. That means it is the personal covenant name of God. And so it's just not giving a generic idea of God, that any God or a generic idea of God. It is a specific naming. And so that understanding should be understood, that the use of this term, kurios, in our Greek Septuagint translation of the Hebrew has a whole lot of tradition built into it that needs to be understood, that we are not referring to just some generic deity, God generically, understood. Now, the Jews by this time, they would have been, in the time of David, there's a possibility that the people could have been, what do you call it, henotheists, in which they understood there were many divine beings, but their particular divine being is called by the Tetragrammaton. And Judaism, by the time of Second Temple Judaism, at the time that the Septuagint was translated, it would have been understood that the in the Jewish religion, there's only one God. It would have developed into, rather than even a henotheism, a more profound monotheism. And thus, when they use the term kurios here, it indeed referred to the only one God worthy of worship. One of the contrasts here that I noticed when I was reading here in the Septuagint is that the Lord, and here we have a verb, we have a present indicative. The Lord shepherds me. Now, we are used to, in our English translation, the Lord is. Here we have a to be verb, but with a kind of a stative sort of thing. The Lord is my shepherd. But here in this translation here, we have the Lord shepherds me. Now that's picking up here this cal participle, this roi that's here. And so we don't even get this idea, I would suggest that possibly it's communicating an activity of what God is doing, not just merely stating a metaphorical title for God. So this Septuagint translation, the Lord shepherds me, and uden me hysterese, we have here. And the interesting thing here is we have this, in our English translation, it is I shall not want. And here we have, here in this cal imperfect, first person. But the interesting thing about this is, if you'll look here, this is a future indicative. You can see here the future sigma that's here. But take a look at this ending here. This is a third person ending. And so it's a little bit different here. And now I do notice here that in the New English translation of the Septuagint, they still pick up the I shall lack nothing, but this is a third person ending here. And so I kind of struggled with understanding this. Is, well, who's the subject here? The he, she, it will lack, will need. And so I was wondering here, well, then I noticed that this uden, I believe, would be a neuter nominative pronoun, actually adjective. And so here's how I was understanding how it could be rendered. Nothing will cause me to lack. Nothing will fail me. Nothing will be, possibly will be absent. I mean, it conveys the same concept of I shall lack nothing. But here I did want to reflect upon the very fact that this is a third person future. Nothing will cause me to lack. And that's my suggested interpretation of how to understand that. Let's go to our next line. And here we have, and this is something that's a stylistic sort of a thing, and this is one of the questions that I have as I read, and also as I have to communicate this in preaching, is, and especially because this is poetry, how much of this is how much of this is style? How much of this communicates intentional, specific meaning. Now, in our English translation, Psalm 23:2, we have, "He makes me lie down." Of course, remembering this is the English translations are typically translated from the Hebrew, but here we have the place of the action: in green pastures, beside quiet waters. We have that at the end of these clauses here. But in both the Hebrew and in the Greek, we have the location of this action put at the front of the clauses, both in this line, and of course we have eis tapon kloes, and here we have epihudatos in front of the verb, the subject and the verb. And the question would be, are they placed there poetically? Are they placed there emphatically, fronting those phrases? And does it communicate some particular extra meaning, or is it stylistic? And that's sort of a thing that has to be decided upon. It may not communicate totally everything about the meaning, but it is something to reflect upon. And especially one of the things that's important to me is the reading of Scripture. I want to capture the audio, the oral concept of Scripture as I'm communicating to other people. And that's why I think the reading of Scripture is so important. I think too many preachers communicate the Scriptures way too quickly. They read through the text far too quickly, and because they want to get to their commentary on it. And I think we need to more intentionally communicate our text. And it just makes me to think, how do we read it out loud for people? And do we need to reflect upon stylistically? Because you could actually render this out of the typical English order, and it would still communicate. So here we have, into a place of verdant green, of young green grass, into a place of green grass, there he caused me to dwell. There he settled me. Here we have an aorist indicative, and here we have this idea that, let me show this thing that I did notice. Notice that this is a present. The Lord is shepherding. And in Greek, they really communicate, it does communicate that ongoing sort of activity. So here we have a present tense verb. Here we have a future tense verb. And then in our next line, we have an aorist verb. God has been shepherding me, and as I anticipate the future, there will not be a lack for the future. And does this follow sequentially? Because he caused me to settle. He settled me. And where did he settle me? He settled me, eis tapon kloes, into a place of green. There he settled me. And then we have this parallel line here. Epihudatos anapausios exethrepsin me. Upon a water of rest, still water, water that's not moving, but water there available. He nourished me from ektrepho. He nourished me. And so we have here these two aorist verbs that communicate something in contrast to the ongoing shepherding that the future will have. And the question is does this settledness that's been established. Here we have the New English translation, in a verdant place. There he made me encamp. By water of rest, he reared me. And that's this concept of trepho, the idea of he brought me up. Communicating some more a very active sort of sense there. Next here, we have in the third verse, Tain sukain mu epistrepsin. Now, one of the things that is an interpretive issue is, how do we understand sukain? Do we, and part of this is trying to understand this, what kind of a mindset here? Some would want to say that this communicates, this tain sukain mu just communicates the idea of life. In other words, my living activity, my life, he turned my life. He restored my life. Here we have this aorist once again. He restored my life. He turned my life. Others might want to would suggest, no, the kind of the concept, the Hellenistic concept of a tripartite, or at least a dualist concept of there's the soul and the body, and that this is emphasizing the soul. And that is certainly a interpretive issue that one would need to reflect upon in the communication to a congregation. Many in the traditions that at least I grew up in, that the idea of soul usually communicates this immaterial concept. In fact, let's take a look here. Most of these, okay, now here we have several different, of course, the King James picks up soul, New King James, English Standard Version, American Standard Version. But here, notice this in the Christian Standard Version. Here, they've picked up translating this concept here, life, rather than soul. Here, New Living Translation, he picked it up and emphasizing the idea of strength. And so here we have an interpretive idea of how do we understand that? Here we have here in the Hebrew, the nephesh as the nafesh, my nephesh. What does that mean? What is the communication here? So that's sort of to translate that. How do you understand this concept here as soul? Is that the best way? Life, just, or even to say that this is he turned my myself. He restored myself. Okay, the next stanza. In our interpretation of these parallel statements, O degesen. This is this is an aorist. You can see here this is the aorist sigma, and then we have this doubling of the initial hodegeo, the doubling, of course, creating an omega, odegesen. He led me. He led me upon paths of righteousness on behalf of his name. Enakin tu onomatos autu. Now, I'm wondering, and this is something that I reflected upon, is this, and with these being both aorist, here we have an aorist and an aorist here, could this reflect a journey to the pasture of the first and second verses? Could this refer to, this is the journey that we have gone from, and now we're settled here? And this is referring to, at least in the Greek translation, is this referring to the idea of that this is the Lord shepherding me, the Lord. I'm not wanting in my place of settlement, because he's turned my life. He's led me, and now I'm settled here where he's caring for me by the still waters in the grass, and does these use of aorist here at least communicate, at least to the Greek reading Jews, this subtle concept of this journey that is being communicated here. This is one of the things that, as a communicator of the text, is how much do we communicate from the Hebrew, and do we see anything in the Septuagint readings that add a nuance? Because all translations are interpretive, and so do we get any sort of interpretive nuance that comes from the Greek? And part of the issue for us as communicators in English is, do we communicate from the Hebrew, or do we communicate from the Septuagint, or do we kind of let them build on one another? Of course, realizing this is the base, the foundation being the Hebrew, but also recognize the recognition that the Septuagint was a translation used by the early church and would have been considered to be the scriptures of the early church. And so it adds a dimension for reflection as we do these sorts of things. So he returned, he turned my soul, my life, myself. He led me upon paths of righteousness, Henokin to Anamatos, Altu, on behalf of, on account of the name of him. The whole journey has been for the Lord. Now let's go to our next line here. Now, this is where we have here in the Septuagint, Ean gar kai porutho in meso skias thanatu u phobethesomai kaka hati su met emu I he rabda su kai he bacteria su altai me pare kalesan. Here we've had present tense in the first verse, future also in the first verse. We've had a collection of aorists, and now we have here a subjunctive aorist. For if also I might go in the middle, in the midst of a shadow of death. See, here is a reflection for a possibility of a potential. Here I'm dwelling on the grass. I'm dwelling by the quiet waters, but is anticipating that the idea of potentially I might be going, the Lord has led me to these places, but I'm at some point might go. This is a possibility. I might be led. I might go in the midst of a shadow of death. So here, this is this anticipation from a state of quiet rest, but not settling in attitude. Uphobethesomai, a future passive. I will not fear. I will not be afraid. I will not fear evil things, bad things. Why? Because haughty, you with me, you are. You are with me. This anticipation of the possibility of the potential. I will not fear evil things, bad things, because you are with me. And then I think here, this building upon he rabda su, kai he bacteria su, your rod and your staff themselves, parakalesan, they encourage me, they urge me. Picking up this imagery of the shepherding, because that's exactly what a shepherd does. A shepherd uses a rod, which is not necessarily a gentle thing, and a staff here to move the sheep through their life. Sometimes these two objects could become very rough and difficult, and they would not so easy. But the psalmist in this translation sees these as a encouragement, as they urge and they encourage by their presence, and possibly even the roughness of the rod and the staff is part of the things that enables him to not fear bad things in the shadow of death, because these things are yielded by a good shepherding person, a good shepherding one. The Lord shepherds me. We move to our next verse. Let's pull this up here. He Tomasas enopion mu trapazon ex enantias ton phlebanton me. Elpanas in elio ten kephalein mu ke kai to poterion su methuskan hos kratistan. You prepared, this aorist indicative, you prepared before me a table. Now, this is where I was having some difficulty. Out of, this is the preposition ek, out of, and then you have enantios, this adjective here. So we've got this out of, from, opposite of, opposed, contrary. And the difficulty is, how do we render this in front of the pressing ones, the oppressing ones? You prepared a table. And here we have here, you prepared, here in their New English translation, you prepared before me a table. And here the New English translation of the Septuagint renders this over against those. So here the idea is communicating a contrary. It's almost a defiant thing. You've prepared a place for eating, a place for me to nourish myself, to be nourished. And it is over almost in defiance of those who have been afflicting. Here in this English translation, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. The idea here is not really, doesn't seem to have the antagonism being emphasized. And yet here, you might, is this the idea of just opposite location-wise in the presence of, or is this sort of a thing, a defiant idea of the preparation of this table in front of the ones that are persecuting, the ones who are afflicting me? Here you have this, we move now. You anointed, this this verb here, and it being the verb, let me see here, lipino. Lipino is the this aorist active verb. You anointed with oil the head of me. So here we have this imagery of anointing. I've seen some pictures here of some people really picking up the shepherding imagery of the use of oil for sheep. I don't know how much the psalm actually picks up that particular sort of imagery, but here's the here you also give it, especially with David, you get this anointedness of David as the king. You anointed with oil the head of me, tan kefalen mu kai, and the cup poterion mu su methuskan hos kratiston. And this is an interesting way of understanding it. Here, the English, my cup overflows. But here, and the cup of you and your cup, see, my cup. In fact, let's see here. I'm here looking at the, see if I can pick up where the, here we have the idea of cup here in the Hebrew, and it has a my cup of saturation. And so here we have a cup of saturation, and rendered as my cup overflows. But here in the Septuagint, your cup, the cup that you provided, referring to the Lord. And here we have this verb here, this this participle actually, methuskan, come from methuskomai. Your cup makes drunk is one rendering that one gloss would say. Your cup makes drunk like, and this is the superlative of agathos, kratiston, and like the best. You basically the best wine. You can of course recall the miracle at Cana, and we have here where Jesus made the best wine from the water, and the praise of it. The emphasis there, of course, is not on the drunkenness of it, but the idea is the Lord makes the best wine. And here, your cup, and it's the idea of He's already prepared a table here, the trapezon. Your cup, you have in the presence of these enemies, you designated me el panos with oil, and your cup that you provide, and picturing this connection with this prepared before me a table that's maybe picked up here. Your cup that you provided, it has the best effect of joy upon me because it's the best. It's kratiston, this superlative of agathos. Here we move to our final two stanzas here. Kai ta elios su kata dioxitai me pasas tas hemeros tes zoes mu kai ta katoikain me in oiko kuriou eis makroteta hemeron. So here we have the and. Let me go ahead and just pull this up so it's a little bit more visible. And your mercy, and here we have a future middle. Your mercy will pursue, will hunt. Your mercy will pursue me. Here we have in the English translation, shall pursue me. Mercy is pursuing. And that's the interesting thing here. Surely goodness and loving kindness in our English translation will follow me. That's kind of a, you just wonder whether or not is that more of a passive following in that English use, but does this concept here of kata dioko, does it communicate a more active, intentional, your mercy will hunt me, almost the imagery of that metaphor, the hound of heaven, and your mercy will pursue me. How long? Pasos tas hemeros tes zoes mu, all the days of the life of me, all the days of my life. And so here we have this picture of this activity of God's mercy, his compassion, hunting the person. How long? All the days of my life. And so it just makes me to think about, if we were to think about this in terms of the whole, this idea that the Lord is shepherding me actively in the present, as we picked up from the first verse. And then he can anticipate there's not going to be a need, and that the Lord then has settled me, caused me to dwell, caused me to settle in green pastures, beside still waters, and even the if potentially I go to the valley of the shadow of death, I'm still not going to fear because God's presence is there. God's presence, even in the midst of the idea that he's done these things, even in the midst of enemies. So God's mercy will pursue me all the days of my life. Kai ta katoikain me in oiko kuriou eis makroteta hemeron. Now here we have, and in this final phrase here, the ta, this is, here we have an article. Here we have a present infinitive, and we have the may. And so the difficulty in translating infinitives is very difficult for many of us. And here we can see that the New English translation of it translate this article infinitive And then we have this pronoun as the object of the infinitive here in the accusative. Here it's translate my residing, the to dwell me. The rendering it literally makes it kind of awkward. My dwelling, my residing, my inhabitation, the place where I'm going to dwell. Now the translation from the English translation of the Hebrew, I will dwell. The idea here, the yashav verb here, that is, let's see where it is. And yeah, here it is. This particular verb here. This being a cow, a perfect, and so, well, exactly, I'm not sure how to understand this particular one, but hey, that shows I'm just not an expert in everything. But here, let's deal with the Greek. Here we have this infinitive phrase here, and the my dwelling, my residing. Where's it going to be? In oiko kuriou eis makroteta hemeron. My dwelling. And here we don't have a to be verb. My dwelling in the house of the Lord with a view toward a length of days, a long expanse of days. As here we have this idea of it being the Hebrew for a length of days, with regard to a length of days. So how long is the dwelling in the house of the Lord? For a length of days. Now, this is the interesting contrast here. Here we've been talking pastoral imagery in previous verses, although we do have that table that's set up maybe in a pasture. But here we have this shift here in the imagery into the house. Now, this does raise an interesting concept, this oiko kuriou, of this imagery of the house of the Lord, and how does that relate with it being a Psalm of David? Because, as we know, David did not build the temple. So how does that exactly, and how would this concept be understood? In here they have the Hebrew in the bait, in the dwelling place of the Lord. Now you wonder whether or not if this was composed by David, and the concept of house here, this bait, is it if it's a reference to the temple, there we've got some difficulty. Would that have been used of the tabernacle? Or is it just used as a generic dwelling place? And then it could be a reference to the tabernacle. I haven't done any specific study on that, but that would be something you could pursue. But in the translation, which is occurring in Second Temple Judaism, where the temple would be something that would have been longed for, and would have been a presence in Second Temple Judaism. Understanding this as the temple in the house of the Lord would have been very natural by the translators to assume that, and not reflecting upon how does that work with the history of David. So here we have, let me go ahead. This is how it looks in the Bible Works version of this. And then let me go ahead and remove that and go ahead and put up that formatted one that I did in my word processor. As we take a look at Lord shepherds me. And here we have that future again. That we have to reflect upon. What is exactly nothing will lack me. Nothing will cause me to lack. Into a place of green, there he settled me. Upon water of rest, he nourished me. The soul of me, he returned. He led me upon paths of righteousness on behalf of the name of him. For if also, and even the understanding of Kai here, for if even also I might go in the midst of the shadow of death, not will I fear evil, bad things. Why? Because you with me, you are, because you yourself are with me. If we take this you, this Sue here as an emphatic, the rod of you and the staff of you, and here we have probably an emphatic pronoun, themselves. These two objects, themselves, me, they encourage. You prepared before me a table out of over against, from being contrary to the ones persecuting me, troubling me. You anointed with oil the head of me, and the cup of you makes drunk like the best. You provide the very best of wine, and the mercy of you will hunt me all the days of the life of me, and my dwelling, the dwelling of me in the house of the Lord for length of days. That is how I understood this particular rendering here. Whether this would be something we could do on a regular basis, this has the possibility of being something we could regularly do. Not necessarily at this time. That's just the time I particularly chose. If you might be interested in this, you can contact me. I'm the pastor at First Baptist Church in Biscoe, Arkansas. You can see here my email, revrogershotmail.com. Also, I am on Facebook in Nerdy Language Group, so you can always send me a direct message through its messaging system. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and if this is something that people would be interested in, I would appreciate a like on my YouTube channel. If you want to subscribe, I do have some ambitions to do some more content, not just Greek reading, but also many different things. But hopefully you've enjoyed this as you watching it live, or as you might watch it at a later time. But hopefully you've had a good time. Maybe you've learned something. I'm open to any critiques, pronunciation, interpretation, but I appreciate you being here and giving your time. Thank you, and God bless.